Big thank you to Jack first off for inviting me along to this talk. It's really lovely, and thank you for everyone for joining in, and hopefully you're not all flooded from last week's rain. So first let me introduce myself. My name is Gemma Esvelt and I am the Assistant Centre Manager at Lanfa Powysland Museum and Welshpool Library. As Jack said before, I am originally from Perth in Western Australia, and I come from a social history background, specialising more in fashion and textile history. And I moved to the UK in the autumn of 2019. I went to university in London, and then I ended up getting the job here and moved to Welshpool. So tonight I will be talking about a project that I've been working on at Lanfa, on updating and designing new display panels for our archaeology gallery. We received some funding to get them designed and printed, but it's been up to me to write them. So I'm not in any means an archaeologist, and my level of understanding comes from watching Time Team when I was little. I can lecture you on for hours on the difference between corseted silhouettes in the late Victorian period, but I could not tell you the difference between a Neolithic pot or a Roman pot. So that's about where I started. So writing anything about the archaeology of the area was a rather daunting process, and it required lots of learning and lots of research, but it's been an absolutely fantastic opportunity for me to get to know both Penny and Jack at CPAT and really develop that relationship with them, and who wrote them in helping me out. So in another way, my lack of knowledge has been quite useful because I've had to start at the very beginning and learning all about our collections. And I'm not very knowledgeable about Wales, having come from Australia, so I've really learned a lot about that as well. And thanks to both Penny and Jack's help, and also my friend Amy at Powys Castle, who has also helped with some of the medieval displays. So that's sort of what we're going to be talking about tonight. I'm going to give a quick introduction to our collection, what goes into writing museum interpretation, designing new panels, and then a little sneak peek at some of my favourite objects that I've discovered along the way. So what do we have at Powysland Museum? Well, we cover almost 500 million years of history, and I'm cheekily including fossils into that. So Powysland Museum collects and displays the social and archaeological history of Montgomeryshire. We have 16 display cases which cover a vast expanse, and you follow that chronologically through the gallery and telling the story of Montgomeryshire throughout the centuries. So in particular, we also hold a large range of archaeological artefacts that have been given to us by CPAT over the years, and we also hold a large amount of their paper archives. So we start off with geology, and one of our oldest objects, which is a fossil, the famous trilobite dingle, you can see in the top corner. And that's from Bronna Buckley, which funnily enough is just outside my window. I can see the trees. And then we move through the Neolithic and Mesolithic periods with a collection of polished stones and axes, flint microliths. And then we've got 5 display cases dedicated to the Bronze Age. So there's been quite a few Bronze Age discoveries in this area, and we've really been able to flesh out a lot of the discussion about the Bronze Age in our panels. So talking about burial culture, weaponry, and hoards. And in particular, we've got quite a few hoards of axes. And we've also got lots of pots and with cremations in them as well. So next we have the Iron Age, and then on to the Romans, and this leads me to 2 of probably our most famous collections. We've got the Welshpool hoard, which was a Roman hoard found, which is what is now Tesco's car park, and the Montgomery coin hoard, which has a find of nearly 5,000 coins, and you can see that on the top right. And then lastly, the medieval period, with one of our cases dedicated to Strata Macella, and you can see one of the tiles from Strata Macella on the bottom right, and another display of various sort of religious and secular archaeological discoveries. We do have one case that doesn't quite fit in with this chronology, but it is quite a useful case because it tells the story about how the museum started, which was through the Powysland Club, and looking at the objects that were donated in the late 1800s and early 1920s. And I've got an example, which is the little Egyptian figure in the bottom left-hand corner. So after that whistle block tour, we'll go on to what is interpretation in the context of a museum. And I've got this little quote because I really loved it. I think it just sort of sums it up. So the aim of information panels within a museum is to make what is on display interesting, engaging and accessible to as wide an audience as possible. You want to appeal to readers who have a wide variety of interests, different levels of understanding, but most importantly, you don't want to dumb it down. You also want to take people on a journey. So that can be both an educational, but also an engaging journey. You want the visitors to actively engage with objects you have on display, and there's a number of ways this can be done. So you can propose questions, encourage them to look more closely at something, and getting them to think. So it's really important to know your audience. Being honest, less than 50% of visitors actually read the text, and even then, the average visitor only reads 20% of that. But interpretation is always expected and you need to have it there. So we need to focus on who our visitors are and try to cater to as many as possible. And our major one here at Powysland Museum is families. So we get a lot of young kids coming in and it's rather sweet. A lot of them practice reading out loud. So I've heard a couple from my office reading the signs and having a practice, and some of them also come to practice their Welsh as well, which is lovely to hear. And I can sort of listen in and go, oh, they're stumbling on that word, or they've had to ask their parent, what does this word mean? And that gives an indication of maybe some of the times we need definitions, or we might need to make the language a little bit more accessible. On average in the museum world, we aim for a reading level of 11, and that's pretty much across most boards in UK museums. And a shameless little plug to any parents or guardians of children in the audience, a fun activity in the museum is our detective quiz, so please come along. There's another aspect of writing museum text is making it relatable, so bringing in a human element. And this is particularly useful for child-friendly audiences, but also just for general people. But it can be quite tricky because it brings in a more sort of fictional element, which we can't necessarily 100% prove. So, for example, in one of the panels, we're talking about daily life in the Stone Age and the types of houses people lived in. We've only got a couple of handful of examples of what these houses actually looked like, and none obviously has survived, but we've got a general idea of what they look like. We've included a photo of a reconstructed one and a little bit about how people lived in them. So this continues that human element to the story, and it allows people to understand the static objects on display and that to have a whole new meaning, something that's relatable. Our other audience is our academics or history enthusiasts, which I'm guessing is a lot of you here in the audience. And you probably know a lot more about archaeology than the general punter. So we need to make sure that the information is accurate, factual, and it doesn't potentially offend someone. So, for example, we've decided to remove Dark and Middle Ages and go for medieval period. I always found that Dark Ages quite misleading until I started studying history. I literally thought it was dark because there was no electricity. And medieval can also be a bit complicated. There's lots of complicated issues with different periods, and don't even let me get started on AD, BC, BCE, CE, and all of that sort of thing. But going back to wording, some of the triangle I sort of stuck to was making it accessible, be brief, and make it obvious. So explaining words, but don't go over the top. Be honest. Use definitions for words that everyone might not know. For example, I had no idea about flint knapping. Jack, bless him, was like, well, clearly it's obvious. I was like, oh, sorry, it's not to me. So I've learned a whole lot, and that's been one of the great things of working with someone who is a specialist in this field and then someone who's not, because I can come along and go, well, I don't know what that word is, or we can really play around with the structure of what we're saying, but it also can be a little bit more academically structured. So being brief, that's quite briefly obvious. Try not to say too much, but this can be a near on impossible task because sometimes you have to summarize in one sentence what someone has written an entire book about. And then making an obvious point. So don't make people search for the meaning, make it clear, obvious. Most people have internet on their phone, so if there's something that they want to know more about, they can have a flick and look it up. So one of the things I came across was admitting as uncertainty. So history, it's not fixed or set in stone. It's forever evolving, and new interpretation discoveries are being made all the time, new theories, new ways of looking at different parts of history. So we need to accept that there are limits to our knowledge and be honest about that. So we don't know exactly what life was like a millennia ago, and these new discoveries might come up and contradict what you had said. But it also opens up the room for debate, and this can have a really positive effect as it dissolves a barrier between the expert and the public. So I have here up on the screen on the right hand side what we're using for the panels on the Bronze Age hoards, and it gives you sort of an example of a different tactic that we're using, where we're asking the visitor a question. So what do you think? We don't know 100% why people buried things in the ground. Looking at it from a modern context, it seems like a really weird idea, and we can't obviously put our minds into the mindset of what someone in the Bronze Age was. So having a list of different theories and then giving a person an opportunity to engage with what's on display and question what happened in the past, and even give themselves an opportunity of why would you bury something today. So now I get to show you the exciting bit, which is an example of some of the panels that we are in the process of designing. And I've blurred out the words because this is a work in progress. It's a draft. It's not a final version yet, so don't look too closely at them. One of the things that we've done is what's called text hierarchy, so helping the reader navigate the information on the panels. So at the top, we have the period and then the date underneath. So we're covering a vast expanse of history. So you want to have it really obvious in a sort of timeline-like way. And then within that period of history, we've got different displays talking about different things. So all our Bronze Age displays are purple, so it helps the reader contextualize by colour the chronology of the display cases. And funnily enough, we got a lot of people who sort of start backwards, just the way it's been set up. They sort of start in the medieval time and they're going back to the fossils, which is always quite amusing, sort of going backwards in time. And then underneath the dates, we have sort of a general introduction to the period, and this gives a sort of background, couple of tidbits about the social history, what's happening at the time, what are archaeologists thinking is happening at the time. And then we go into what I've nicknamed the blue sub-bit, which goes into much more information and invites people to take a closer look at what is on display. And this has also given us the opportunity to highlight some of the objects. But within that, you've got to be careful when thinking of the future. You don't want it to be a set in stone display where if something's mentioned on the display in the panels, that's it, it can never be changed. You want something that you do have a little bit of flexibility to rotate. So for example, if a new Bronze Age hoard gets discovered tomorrow, it will still fit in with the rest of the display and the panels, so I can put that on display again. And then we have Welsh on one side, English on the other, and that has been another sort of difficulty in really condensing what we're saying. So what I was saying before, which was be brief. So when you have two languages to contend with, you've got to really make it short, sharp and snappy, which can be a little bit complicated. There's been a couple of arguments about what to include. And then graphics and visuals, which make it look not just pretty, but they can be massively helpful in contextualizing history. So I personally am a visual learner, so having an image really helps me and it makes it more relatable. It also breaks up the words a little bit and makes it quite bright and colourful. So we have used quite a variety of different images and graphics. For example, we've used some aerial shots of digs. So in the bottom right hand corner, this is kind of Khan, and we've done some aerial shots, had included some aerial shots from the Khan, and then also some archaeological dig pictures. So when it was actually being dug up, which gives the audience an opportunity to see what it was like in the ground. A lot of archaeological discoveries obviously at underground, you can't go and visit the site, or it's in the middle of a farmer's field and they're usually not pressed if you come along and want to go and have a look at their mound. So giving a sort of visual impression of what it looked like, especially from an aerial photo, really helps. And then lots of images of the actual objects. So you'll see we've got a gorgeous axe on the top right hand corner, and then we're playing around with some of the visual aspects of that as well by having a picture of some molten bronze and whether that works. So we're still sort of testing the waters. And then we've got some artistic impressions. So in the bottom left we've got the fossils, and the trilobite dingle is on display in this case, and then we've got an artistic impression of said trilobite dingle and what the marine floor might have looked like around about that period of time. And then on the top left hand side we've got some of the coins. So obviously the coins, there's 5,000 of them, so there's quite a few and it can be a bit overwhelming to look at them. So I've plucked out a couple which are really quite beautiful and are really visually interesting to look at, and we've got them going around the display. But at the same time, we've got what the coins looked like when they were discovered, which was in that pot, which, oh gosh, can you imagine discovering that at the time? It's been pretty amazing. So now you can go into a museum and you'll have a whole new appreciation of the work that goes into interpretation panels and labels. And some museums have entire departments that are dedicated to literally just writing their labels. So next time you go to a museum, go and check them out. So now I want to share some of my favourite objects that I've discovered while I've been working on these display cases. It's been so much fun to open up display cases, capture some really fantastic quality images. So I took these photographs here with a high definition camera and some lights. And it's also given me an opportunity to handle some of the objects and really look at them in close detail. So I've never had a chance to handle, let alone look really, really closely at prehistoric pottery. These ones are in amazing condition, and the level of intricate detail on them is just phenomenal. So you can see here, these are the top two are collared urns from Canada Khan, and the bottom one is one of our shards of a Mesolithic pot. And you can see the sort of details that are on the rim, and they would have been made by all sorts of decorations, all sorts of materials. You can use your fingernail and the impression of your fingernail to sort of bend and make shapes, and you can sort of see that in the bottom little shard there, that maybe that was what was used. You also get whipped cord, which you can see in the top left hand one, those little wee sort of indications of some sort of material that have been used, and you get this lovely sort of ropey delicate pattern, and then spots in the full urn that we've got just in the middle. I mean, they're just gorgeous to look at in pure detail. And next time you come to Powysland Museum, please do sort of get up close and really look at objects. So the next one is my personal favourite, and I'm very pleased with this one, partly because I'm also very fascinated with medieval history, so this is right up my alley. This is a decade ring from Strata Marcella. Unfortunately, I haven't yet been able to open this display case, so you'll have to rely on a illustration. This is from the Montgomeryshire collection. I can't remember which volume, but I'll make a note of it for you, and if anyone wants to know, you can get copies of that in Welshpool Library. So a decade ring, it's quite an interesting little object. I'd never heard of it before, and this is where it's an example of the rabbit holes that you can go down when you are researching objects. So the typical decade ring is about sort of 1500 1800s-ish. It can be a bit earlier, a bit later. And it comes from the name because it has 10 knobs around it, 10 decades. And they were used in the same way as a rosary. So Hail Mary prayer would have been said for each knob, and then an Our Father for the bezel, which is the sort of the larger one in top. Rosaries were forbidden in 1571, but the Act doesn't mention decade rings. So these were made well up until the 18th century, and probably not worn on a finger. You can imagine they would have been a little uncomfortable, but rather worn on a jacket or in a pocket or maybe on a necklace, and again functioned very much like a rosary. The one that we have in the museum has a little cross on the front seal, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And then, although this is technically 3, and I said my favourite 3 items, these sort of count because they're ancient Roman finds. So on the left-hand side, we've got this wonderful ring, and it's made, the impression in the middle is a blue paste, and it's a portrait of a man standing, possibly Mercury, holding a staff with 2 snakes riding around it, and possibly a money bag. It's dated to the 3rd century AD, and it was discovered near Newtown, and it's gold. On the shoulders, it has this lovely filigree work on the side. It's absolutely tiny. A lot of people, when working in the museum, they go, "Oh, do you ever try things on?" No, I don't. But oh, I would have loved to have tried this one because it's just gorgeous. In the middle, we've got a coin from the Montgomery coin hoard, and then on the right we have a brooch, which is sort of, we think it might be emblematic of some sort of like bullhorn or an animal of some sort. And that one is, I think that was discovered in Llanymynech, and excuse me for my appalling Welsh pronunciation of words, I do apologise. I'm Australian, I have an excuse. So to sort of wrap up of, oh, it was only half an hour, so talked a little bit quickly, I'm sorry. But we do have some rather exciting news coming up, and I'm hoping that soon you'll be able to come in and see these. So we have a medieval silver annular brooch, which is the one in the middle, and this was found in Llandyssil. And then we have an early 18th century ring, which was found in Cersus, which is the one on the bottom, and it's sort of been nicknamed a Ring of Mordor because it's a memento mori ring, and it's got a skull on the front. So we have those hopefully coming soon, and they will be going on display. And then you might have seen on the news these coin hoards which were found, I think it was the end of 2020, around 2021, and we are currently in the process of applying for some grant funding to get them into the collection as well. So we've got a find of 5 silver coins that were discovered in Churchstoke, and they're from Henry VII and Henry VIII period. And then we have a find of 3 gold coins discovered in Trafalgar, and apology again for pronunciation. And 2 of them are from James I period, and the other one is from Charles I. So keep an eye on this space, and hopefully they will be coming soon to be on display. So that is wrapped up. I've actually gone a lot quicker than I thought, but it will give me an opportunity, I suppose, to sort of rope Jack into a discussion of the process that we took while doing this display. So Jack has been